This is Grafted Together with ACSI Chief Ministry Officer Jerry Nelson.
John Ruskin said, all books are divisible into two classes, the books of the hour and the books of all time. He is here referring to the classics, those books that have shaped most notably the Western world. And if there are books of the hour, those that are seasonal in nature or only useful for the moment, could there be an education for the hour? Equally, if there are books of all time, then I wonder if there's an education for all time. Is there a way to educate our students, those disciples in our care, in such a way that it enables them to stand the test of time? In the first century, the attitude of those new converts to the way, it was expected that they would experience trials and tribulations. And they will remember the words of Jesus who said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." They, in the words of Watchman Nee, saw this as the normal Christian life. Therefore, at the core of their teachings or educational pursuits was to ensure that all believers in their care understood what it meant to pursue righteousness and live a worthy life of the calling they've received, even until death. I believe it is safe to say that college and career planning was the last thing on the minds of these first century believers, and retirement meant something entirely different. The Apostle Peter writes this to a church in the midst of great persecution. He says, "In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who through faith are shielded by God's power unto the coming of the salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." And so for me, this raises the question, are we educating our children, God's children, in such a way as to result in a genuine faith, one that results in praise, glory, and honor when they meet their Maker? And for us at ACSI, this is why spiritual formation matters. It is what makes Christian education. It is the end goal of education, and this is an education that honors God through and through. And if you are not a part of the growing spiritual formation network, you're missing out. In our last network meeting, we had the opportunity to hear from Dr. Roger Erdveg, who walked us through strategies on equipping teachers and training them that they can really effectively train students in the development of a biblical worldview. So coming up on April 28th, we'll have Dr. Milton Gonzalez, Executive Director at Covenant Christian Academy in McAllen, Texas. He will join us to walk us through the last phase of our spiritual formation journey map on how to equip teachers and leaders in preparing them for and responding to crisis. So to gain access to past meeting recordings, be sure to join the Spiritual Formation Community Group. To register for the upcoming Spiritual Formation Network, you can sign up at acsi.org/convene. That is acsi.org/convene, and look for the Spiritual Formation Network link. Get registered today to connect with spiritual formation ambassadors literally from around the world and receive regular updates on upcoming training, network opportunities, as well as related resources. Again, that is acsi.org/convene. So joining the podcast today to talk about this whole idea of an education for all time is Dr. Chuck Fuller, who serves as director of the Honors College and associate professor of Christian Studies at Anderson University in South Carolina. A native of Kentucky, Dr. Fuller came to AU in 2010 following 13 years in full-time pastoral ministry. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, where his primary emphasis was on homiletical theology with additional studies in philosophy and systematic theology. Dr. Fuller is driven by an insatiable curiosity across academic disciplines and a deep desire to help young people navigate enduring human questions. He is married to Jessie. They have two children, a daughter, Kaylin, and a son, Ian, and together they enjoy hiking, kayaking, and every opportunity to travel. So that means, Dr. Fuller, we've got to get you down to Miami. Welcome to the
Oh,
podcast.
sounds good. Thank you, Jerry. Good to be with you.
Oh man, I'm really excited. And as we were talking, this is just really a continuation of a conversation that we had when I had an opportunity to visit AU back in I believe it was October or early November. The time is just really blending together. The weather is affecting our sense of our sense of time, right?
That's true. That's true.
Well, hey, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming the dean of the Honors College, or even your journey into higher Christian ed out of the pastoral ministry?
Sure. If you've ever seen the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, where Jack Sparrow is on a sinking boat, and as the boat sinks, he steps onto the dock, that is something of my journey. The Lord has blessed me in such a way that I've almost tripped into every position that I've had. I mean, under His providential hand. When I began PhD studies in 2004, I really had maybe a mere inkling toward academics. I really did PhD studies to become the best equipped pastor I could be.
Mm,
But I was the kind of pastor who couldn't stop reading books, could not stop going to school. And because of the context I was in pastoral ministry, I developed a real passion to really help young people navigate their questions. This
mm,
first started during my years in youth ministry, and even when I was a pastor in Louisville, about a mile from the seminary. Just the context of our church, particularly in the age in which we live, thinking about secularity, people have higher order questions about God, the world, and themselves. And I just sort of had a knack for maybe talking people through those things and helping them find answers to their questions. And eventually that takes an academic turn. The story is really pretty funny. I'd been teaching adjunctly at the seminary for about a year. I came home one day and there was an email on the computer that was in our basement from Michael Didway, who's the dean of the College of Christian Studies here in Anderson. And he said, I have a position opening up in August. I received your name and a recommendation. I'll be in Nashville, Tennessee next week. Would you like to talk? And I took the computer, took it upstairs, put it on the kitchen table, looked at my wife, said, Jesse, I've never heard of it, but I think we're about to move to Anderson, South Carolina. And she said, hold up. And she went to Google Maps to see if there was a Target in Anderson. And when it came up positive, she's like, yeah, we can go. And I'm telling you, 10 days later, it was a done deal. I'm talking interview finished, job offered, contract on a house. And the Lord's been really good to us in Anderson. So I came here as just a faculty member of the College of Christian Studies. And when AU began to redream what honors should look like at a university like this, I was part of the task force that began to think that through and put it together. And Ryan Neal, who's now our provost, was then the what became the honors program. He was the director, and so I began teaching in honors really early, teaching our apologetics courses. And then when he became the provost, I slid into the director's role. So I've been directing honors at AU since 2016, and it's been a real thrill.
yeah, I mean, really, when I think about the timeline itself, it's before COVID and it's after COVID. You talk about really navigating some really
Mhm.
challenging times, and yeah, we're definitely going to get into the nitty-gritty of what you guys found and what you discovered as it relates to
Mhm.
the Honors College itself. But I
Right.
want to kind of back up, and I really appreciate. I would say the focus that you had as a pastor, really just helping students to navigate those higher ordered questions. Many people who know my story, I am where I am because I had a pastor who sat down with me and a group of our friends at a really critical period in our life where we had big questions. And he was going through Pastor James R. Summers, he was going through his own, um, I would say, transition of understanding what church ministry was supposed to be. And where he arrived at was that if he was really going to be effective and effectual as a pastor, he needed to dedicate significant time to the youth and help them to answer those questions. And
Mhm.
so at one of um, our church's anniversary. Actually, it was our 55th anniversary. They were asking him to cast vision for the church and the school, and he said at it that, he's like, I'm not an evangelistic pastor. He said in this deep Southern accent, I'm not an evangelistic pastor. I'm a teaching pastor, and I want our folks to be able to defend the faith. And so he said that for the church, and he says for the school. He's like, I want this to be an authentic Christian school where we help these students to understand how to defend their faith, like all of this stuff. And then he went into this whole diatribe about what a good education is. He says a
Mhm.
lot of people talk about a good education, and he said it's not just about a good education; it's about the right kind of education. So I want to kind of start there in our conversation. What is a good education?
Well, an old question. Um, I think there's a lot of wisdom in the classical tradition here, and we won't get into the weeds of that.
Mhm.
Um, and I think obviously the Christian tradition fuels sort of the classical idea and the liberal arts, the liberating arts. But I think we should start with human formation.
Mhm.
And this is maybe what we've lost sight of these days with education, particularly higher education, is the forming of a human. That education does clearly have an informational aspect to it. Yes, you're going to learn the things, right? But the goal is not merely to know the things. The goal is to be a well-developed, well-rounded, capable human who can think critically, work collaboratively for the common good, and have a formidable internal character. I think about C.S. Lewis and the way he described ethics in the analogy of the ships. He said, the ships have to be in formation. Each one has to be seaworthy on its own, and they have to have a destination that they're moving toward together. And I think we can think about education in that same way, right? And that's why the Christian tradition has something unique to offer in education is that we a very firm anthropology that we understand what it means to be made in God's image, a humble acknowledgement of the fall, that we are not what we should be, an acknowledgement of the work of Jesus and its transformational effect on us, and that those things can really fuel a vision for education, for forming the person. In Christian terms, it would be sanctification, and I think education can be a large part of the sanctificational process if we're viewing it in terms of its formative aspect.
Yeah, yeah. I there's a lot of talk. I mean, especially has been highlighted today since certain parts of our society can't define what a woman is, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But
right.
there's even been a lot of talk within the Christian circles about being made of the image of God, being made in the image of God. But what I found, it's a talking point, right? But what I
Mhm.
found is when you kind of scratch the surface, like there's varying different definitions of what it truly means to be made in the image of God. And it would be safe to say it's like um, we can say this term, but if we really don't know what it means, then when we seek to form human beings, right, in the image of Christ, then we're probably missing the mark. So from your perspective, what does it mean to be human?
Oh, you're asking the hard questions today, Jerry.
I'm
Uh,
sorry, I thought I forgot I was supposed to pull the softballs out of the bag and just lob them.
it's all good. Yeah, the Imago Dei is, you're right, it is a concept that's often thrown around and really rarely teased out. I think theologians tend to talk about it in two frames. One would be the substantive frame, which means there are certain qualities or characteristics of God that he's chosen to share with us. These may
Right.
be volitional, they may be emotive, these sorts of things. And then there's the what we might call the representative frame, that it's not just that we are the image, we are being the image in an ambassador's role to creation. We're to be God's image to God's world. And I think that is reflective of the temple language in Genesis 1. In some ways, this is God building for himself a temple that he occupies, and we are the regents of that temple. And obviously, you read from Peter earlier, First Peter chapter 2. Peter picks up on that language, the church as the
Yeah.
temple, and we're being the priest, so to speak, in that temple. So I think the answer to that question is not either or, it's both. um, and recognizing the uniqueness of humanity in creation, I think, is fundamental to education, even as, in a real sense, that's being threatened by
Mhm.
technological advancements. I do have some concerns about artificial intelligence. Yeah, can it help me do some menial tasks? Sure. But if I'm not careful, I'm unloading onto a machine things that are essentially human.
Yeah.
If I'm allowing it to do my thinking for me or my writing for me, that there's something about language that's fundamental to humanity. A speaking God created speaking creatures.
Right.
And I have real interest in speech act theory. What does a word mean? What does a word do? Why do we talk? Because God's a speaking God. And I think language is a fundamental aspect of being human. And that's why in education, things like writing should never go away. Because often I, I don't think we really know what we think about something until we are forced to articulate that.
Yes.
And so speaking and thinking, or language and cognition, are not two separate realms. They're part of the same thing. And this is why I think that there's something about normal education. We read, we think, we write, and we talk, and we do that again and again and again and again. That may sound boring, but done well, it is tremendously exciting because we're stepping into being the kind of creatures that God made us to be, thinkers
Mhm.
and talkers.
Yeah. That that so resonates again with my I it resonates with my own upbringing, where that's essentially what we did. This is my pastor. He decided that he was going to essentially give up his Sunday afternoon. And again, we were, I, I mean, I would say hardcore Southern Baptist. It was Sunday school at 9, church service at 10:30, and then 6 o'clock evening service. And he threw in there, we were going to do 4:30 theology classes. And that's essentially what we did. And what one of the first books that he pulled out, that he had us read, and it was Bernard Ram's Protestant Biblical Interpretation.
Whoa, yeah.
That was the very first book he had us read. But what he did that was genius, and we didn't realize it at the time, was he assigned each of us. So I was 20, 21 at the time.
Mm.
So he assigned each of us a chapter in the book, and the responsibility was to outline the chapter and teach it to the group. And then we had discussion.
That's heavy, man.
We did that for like 3.5 years. Like, I mean, we did that constantly. And of course, naturally, the conversations would spill over into everyday conversations because we were young. Many of us were just getting married. And so
Mhm.
we were trying to figure out things in life. And so just the affirmation of the ability to, as you just said, read something, articulate, or even as we both understand, participate in that great conversation, kind of have a conversation with the text itself, ask questions, articulate your position, and then began talking about it with other people, and that it has that sharpening and formative process. So that whole idea of the ordinary education, that's a real powerful concept. But I want to kind of go back to what you just said before you started diving into the concerns about artificial intelligence. We're not here to talk about artificial intelligence, but the concerns
Right.
remain. And that the way that we view education, or here's my question for you. It seems like we're leaning more towards a utilitarian view of education. It's what I can get out of it versus the formative process. And at least from my vantage point, it seems that folks don't find substance. It doesn't, it can't make me enough money if I'm just kind of getting this liberating type of education. I need something that's going to help me make money, help me get out of my current situation. What's your perspective and take on that, Chuck?
Yeah, I do have real concerns about what we might say the commodification of education,
Mm,
or viewing it in strictly utilitarian terms. This is a credential that will get me a job that will make me X amount of dollars. Now, obviously, that's part of the equation, and we can't avoid that. And we shouldn't avoid that. We should be thinking vocationally about
mm,
education, even at the undergraduate level. But if we're not careful, the utility of the education and the credential that can put you on a career path might overshadow really the core, as we've said, those formative aspects. I think it was 2011 or 2012 when I was first at AU. I was part of a small task force, and we interviewed various employers in the region. Most of them were industries.
mm,
The upstate of South Carolina, we're really blessed with a growing economy. BMW, Bosch, Michelin. There's a lot of engineering and manufacturing around here, and inevitably, and healthcare industry is big as everywhere, but here too. Inevitably, the response to our questions went like this: we want to hire people who are critical thinkers, who are collaborative workers, and they're decent humans. If you can provide us with that kind of person, we can give them the skill set they need to succeed in the career. Now, that doesn't mean a choice of major is somehow unimportant, right? It does mean that even those who are capitalizing on the utility of a degree, those hiring people, recognize that the real value of education is as formative as it is vocational. And so I think we have an opportunity in higher education, particularly Christian education, to in some ways sell what we're doing within the great tradition of what we're doing. And
yeah.
it is the formative aspect of education. So again, it is a balance. It is not one to the elimination of the other, but the point of emphasis in my mind is to concentrate on this formative aspects. And that's completely what the Honors College is about. That um, recognizing these students will go on and in all likelihood have successful high level professional careers. We recognize that what contributes to that success is not simply um, the successful completion of an engineering degree or nursing or whatever these high powered careers are, but it begins with the formative things, thinking long and hard about, again, what does it mean to be human? What is this world in which we live? And who created all this? How do we think well about God, the world, and ourselves? And then just under that, what is truth and how do we know it? How do
Mhm.
I know what is good and how to pursue it?
Yeah.
And why do we as humans put such a value on what we call beauty? Why do we
Yeah.
seek things that we think are beautiful? And you approach those questions together, and they can't help but inflame and inspire vocational pursuits. A few years ago, we had a nursing major develop sort of a theology of healthcare
Mm,
based on, and this would apply to, like, yeah, I'm, you know, kind of dyed in the wool Southern Baptist from birth,
yeah.
but she used sacramental theology from the Anglican tradition to talk about embodiment and
Mm.
symbol and image, and how these things really can to form not just theological, but a philosophical basis for caring for bodies.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it was it would so easily translate across denominations. And in Baptist, like we just call them like the ordinances, right? The Lord's Supper
Yeah.
and baptism. And it's that kind of thing that we're pursuing. That out of thinking really hard about higher order questions, she developed a really clear vision for her healthcare profession to follow.
And so the orthodoxy informs the orthopraxy.
Yes,
So right doctrine it informs what we ought to do, which is the ethics. And if you get the orthodoxy wrong, then it's very, very difficult to get the orthopraxy right on a
that's right.
consistent basis. I really think it's a really good data point, that you have these these industries that they don't their mission is not to bring glory to Jesus Christ, but they're saying, no, listen, BMW has its very specific systems, or you said Bosch has its very specific systems. And but if you can give me someone who's adaptable, who can solve problems, or who can at least contribute to the solving of problems, then it unlocks the potential. Like, the bottom line of an organization is really a byproduct of the level of creativity and ability to be able to solve a real problem,
That's
in
right.
real time. Just another parallel here. I was watching a documentary on, I think the organization is called Fairchild Electronics. So they're the semiconductor. Are you familiar with them? I'm not sure, but
Not at all.
they're they it was they produce semiconductors. Um, and those are the semiconductors that went into the Gemini and Apollo missions themselves. But here's the cool thing, Chuck. When they were talking about the backstory of all of these guys, guess where they came from? Most of them were farmers.
Yeah.
And think about what you have to be able to do on a farm. It's like, man, when the tractor break down, you can't go to Target or Walmart and get a new one. There's no Home
Yeah.
Depot that's around the corner, or Ace Auto Part or whatever mechanic. No, you had to learn how to fix it yourself. And so there was a
Mhm.
natural problem solving. There was resilience. You have a lot of failure on the farm. So when you talk
Mhm.
about critical thinking, there's collaboration, and you talk about being a good human being, and that a lot of that is formed just through resilience, right? You just understanding that failure comes with life, but if you can learn from your failures, or even the failures of other people, and ingest that, then it's going to help you to, again, be that good person. Of course, in our case, we're being formed in the image of Christ. So that's a really good data point. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the honors program. You mentioned about a
Mm.
task force that was formed, that led to the development of the honors college. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we had an honors program decades prior, and Uh, we just wanted to revive something that we thought was, first of all, maybe a bit unique, and secondly, the question hanging over our head was, what should an honors program look like at a university like this?
Mhm.
If it were to be tip of the spear, laser focus on our mission, what should that look like? And we visited and explored a variety of universities, trying to gather ideas and brainstorm. And what we settled on was that this should not be a great books program, even though we do read the great books.
Mhm.
This should not be a history of philosophy program, even though we do explore the tradition. Uh, but we thought perennial human questions was where we should land. This meant that our program could not therefore be regular classes with a longer syllabus. My own backstory is I actually dropped out of the honors program when I was in college
Mm.
because these were just regular classes, only had more assignments. And after one semester of that, I thought, who wants this? And so we wanted this to be a unique curriculum, right? And the way it works is it's open to any major on campus because it satisfies roughly half of the gen ed requirements or the core curriculum.
Mm.
Um, but these are unique classes, so they're students of 15 or 16 in a room, and we explore perennial human questions in light of the Christian tradition. Class number one is Athens and Jerusalem, going all the way back to
Yeah.
uh, the Greek philosophical tradition, the early church, how they interacted, where they were in tension, the strange points that sometimes they got along. How is it that Augustine would say of Plato that he probably would have been a believer had he known? That's an
Yeah.
odd thing to say, right?
Yeah.
We moved from there to Reformation, Renaissance, and revolutions, thinking about the Protestant Reformation not merely as a ecclesial and theological shift, but how it produced sociological shifts, and that we don't think about nation states the same way anymore.
That's correct.
Even the Protestant work ethic and the
Yes.
way that gives way to capitalism, and the way even like the United States is something of a post-Reformation experiment, right?
Mhm.
Um, we move from there to a class called modernity and postmodernity. We think hard and long about social contracts,
Mhm.
the rise of the behavioral sciences. They, they read of Freud and Nietzsche, the real sort of mind bending stuff. And I love to watch students do this. They have three reactions when they first read Freud. The first reaction is what? The
Mhm.
second reaction is, oh, what if he's right? And then the third reaction is, nah. So that's great. And then they take an apologetics course, which is less about formal apologetic arguments, even though we do pursue those. It's more about what does a credible and compelling articulation of the Christian faith look like in our time. You've been on a journey that spans 2 millennia. But what does this look like now? And we think about Charles Taylor's secularization thesis.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
think about the role of rationality, evidence, revelation, and faith, and the way we defend and articulate the faith. And so this has been a success for us, in that if students are successful in that first semester in Honors 101, they sustain through the program. We have high retention rates. We've added something in about 5 years ago that's been a unique value add. Before classes begin in January, so roughly the first week of January, we'll take our freshman class to Washington, D.C. We take our Old Testament professor and a New Testament professor, and we spend the bulk of that week at Museum of the Bible.
Mhm.
And man, it's one thing to visit a museum. It's another thing to visit a museum with someone who really knows the museum
Yeah.
and knows what they're talking about. And there's a sense in which I think our two professors here may understand Museum of the Bible better than Museum of the Bible understands Museum of the Bible. That's not an insult to them at all. It's just that these guys have spent their lives studying these things,
Mhm.
and man, just they sort of just set that place on fire for a week. And if we can take those students and provide them with these kinds of experiences where they are exploring these kinds of questions, I mean, in a sense, they're talking about the same questions, God, the world, and themselves, over and over again, but like turning a diamond. They're looking at through different facets and different eras of history, through different disciplinary perspectives. I mean, these courses are taught by philosophers, behavioral sciences, literature professors, history professors, theologians, economics professors, exploring those same questions. When they finish it, it's not like they have everything perfectly nailed down. This is everything I believe and why I believe it. But they are equipped to continue to pursue their own questions, and they're equipped to help other people pursue those questions as well. And all of this contributes to that vision of critical thinking, collaborative working, contributing to the common good. And so it plays well in the marketplace as well. So back in 2011, 2012, those were sort of the dreams that we dreamed. And quickly, and credit Ryan Neal, our provost, for this. He was the pioneer. and with the support of the president, that dream became reality in less than 2 years.
Wow.
We ran an experimental group. We called them our lab rats. In 2012, 2013, we selected a group of 13, 14 students. We're saying we're going to tinker with you guys and see how this works. And it worked better than we thought it would. And really by 2014, this thing was up and running
Mm,
and running well. So we have roughly 140 to 150 students enrolled in the Honors College at any given time. We're running at max capacity every year. We're right now in the middle of another admission cycle for fall. We will get 120 applications, only have 45 or 50 seats. So it's selective and it's competitive, um, but it's an invigorating experience. I'll just say there are probably other people on this campus who would fight with me, but I think I have the best job here because I get to work with these students
yeah.
and this faculty. And it is a blessing for me to sit in a room with honors faculty sometimes, and I have two thoughts. My first thought is, "Ooh, I think I might be the dull knife in this drawer." And my second thought is, "Whoa, this is fun." So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It really is.
You know, it reminds me, as you were talking about, those enduring human questions. I believe it was 2003, four, or five, right around that time. George Barner published "Think Like Jesus," and
Mhm.
so it was fresh off of his research that he had did. And so, he's been tracking it for many years, but he was, really concerned about, Christians who Bible people who are professing Christians, whether they had a biblical worldview. And I remember, again, my same pastor. I came back to the school and I was teaching Bible at that time, and he hands me this book with this red book, and he says, "Jerry, I want you to teach this." I'm like, "Pastor, what is this?" Like, what is this? Around that time, Summit, they had their curriculum for high schoolers. So when I graduated, I
Mhm.
was familiar with the whole concept of a biblical worldview, but I would say that's when it got introduced, that the whole concept. And so when Pastor gave me the book, I was like, "Oh, okay, I remember this is." So I pulled out my old Summit binder, and I remember a lot of the questions and the comparison of the worldviews and everything. But what I really appreciated about Barner's book was he had listed out, I think it was seven of those enduring questions. But the quote that really got me was he says, "Many Christians are threadbare." He
Mm.
said they're threadbare. And so when I think about how you structured the Honors College, you're basically given that through line, and those enduring questions
Mhm.
become the through line in which holds those pearls of knowledge, if you will, together. The economics, the behavioral sciences, everything else that you teach, it's those enduring questions that hold things
Right.
together, and where the knowledge is seen, if I dare say, in an integrated way, like there's wholeness to the
Yeah.
presentation of the knowledge rather than being, as Francis Schaeffer said, seeing everything in bits and pieces and really not understanding how the big story informs how the big story informs the particulars themselves.
Yeah, and I think that that's huge, and that we should seek to be truly a university.
Yeah,
That there is a unity to our knowledge. And the beautiful thing is the unity is not merely a concept that's important, not merely a worldview that's important. The unity is a person,
yeah,
right? That
right.
you think long and hard about John's first chapter and the prologue to that gospel, and at the center of the universe is not an it, it's a he.
So he, yes,
And I have this sense, and I'm not sure about this, and I don't know what New Testament scholars would say to me, but I have a sense that John is, in a sense, maybe trolling the Greeks a little bit. Like, you're looking for the logos, you're
yeah,
looking for the central principle of the universe, you're looking for the
for the
one thing that'll make
plan.
sense of everything. I got it, and it's
Yeah,
not an it; it's a person, right?
yeah.
And man, it's wonderful. Yeah.
I might agree with you. I think John does a lot of trolling in his gospel anyways. He's what
Yeah.
I often laugh at when he says he calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. And he when the resurrection happens, he says that he beat Peter there. It's like
It's great.
so I think that's
Yeah.
there's a good case to be made there.
Yeah.
So speaking of books of all time, and I'd love to know what are your books of all time, Chuck Fuller? What are
Jerry,
some? Yeah.
you sent me a list of questions, and it's like I'm comfortable answering all of these, but this last question about my three favorite books is almost impossible. So this is my answer today. You asked me like
Okay,
tomorrow
that's
or later this
fair.
afternoon.
That's fair.
This may change, but I tried to identify one book from the tradition, and then a couple of books that have really made me think about my own life and career.
Mhm.
And so the one thing from the tradition would be Anselm's Proslogion.
Mhm.
And I think it strikes me in that, like the ontological argument for God's existence, it is it will make you stumble a little bit. It'll make you
Mhm.
scratch your head and think about what is the connection between thought and reality. Uh, and I the ontological argument when I first encountered it late in my college career, I just quickly dismissed it as this is just goofy. And about 15 years later, I was like, whoa. But that's really not the impact that Anselm's work had on me. It's that he would write philosophically in the form of a prayer. That he
Mhm.
presents this argument as a reflection on God and a prayer to God.
Mhm.
And for me, it was that writing. First of all, it's just on its face beautiful, but understanding that thinking long and hard about something is not unspiritual.
That's good.
In fact, thinking our thinking life and our spiritual life, living life before the face of God, that these things should be together. And that was the impact of that work on me. Now, in a more contemporary frame, something that's had a deep effect on my thinking over the past 10 or 15 years is Charles Taylor's A Secular Age. Now,
Mhm.
that there's a decent amount of scholarly conversation about Taylor, whether or not he gets all of his philosophical history just right, uh, different things about his own perspective. He's Canadian Catholic and these sort of things. But I do think there's something almost maybe intuitively correct about his take on secularity and the way people are thinking out there. And when I first introduced Charles Taylor to students in, oh goodness, 2012, 2013, it's funny how I observe their response. So 12 or so years ago, 12, 13 years ago, they would encounter Taylor and they had winced just a little bit, like,
Mhm.
you know, a few years later, like, oh, he's putting language to my feelings. Like
Yeah.
he's giving language to my own thoughts. And now, 2025, 2026, you give them Charles Taylor, like, well, yeah, duh. This is the world in which we live.
Mhm.
And so he's been a great thinking partner for me and being in tune with what it's like to live in the world in which we live. And I
Yeah.
think his language about imminent frame and cross pressures, I think it's a really important thing he's put together. The third book I would say comes from homiletics, and it is Fred Craddock's little volume called As One Without Authority. Now, let me say up front, I have deep theological and philosophical differences with Fred Craddock. In some ways, he was uh, really influenced by Bultmann,
Yeah.
deeply. He was sort of, in a sense, he Karl Barth gone to the pulpit in a way,
Mhm.
a very phenomenological idea of preaching and words. But I tell you what Craddock did for me, particularly when I think about talking and preaching, is that even like when we teach the Bible, we're not merely extracting concepts and then relaying those informationally.
Right.
That God's revelation comes to us in real time, real authors, real books, real stories, real people.
Right.
And in some way, we are to see ourselves in these stories
Right.
and grab a sense of the tension that's in these narratives.
Yeah.
So I think about there's is this speaking of John's gospel, right? John chapter 6, he feeds the crowd.
Hmm.
They're excited, they're following, maybe like the hype train's going on. And Jesus turns to the crowd and he says, "Oh, you want to follow me? Great. Eat my flesh and drink my blood."
Like, what are you
Like,
talking about?
what are you doing, man? And so many in the crowd leave. And not too long, Peter kind of corners Jesus, like, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" Right? And Jesus said, I'm loosely paraphrasing, "Oh, you want to leave too?
Yeah.
Now's your chance."
Mhm.
In John 6:68, Peter says to him, "To whom will I go?
Yeah. Yeah.
You have the words of eternal life." And I've learned, like, in that, I am Peter, right?
Mm.
I am Peter.
Mhm.
And Craddock taught me to read the Bible in its literary mode
Yeah.
and to learn that those tensions that occur in those narratives are not simply for me to extract an idea.
Right.
They're for me to see myself in those pages and their encounter the living Jesus.
Yeah.
And so today, those are my top three.
Well, just on that last point, it's all the more reason that we 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 really improve, I would say, as believers, our reading skills, and also how we read the Bible, not just plucking a verse here and there. That's only possible. What you just described is when we immerse ourselves in the narrative and seek to absorb it. But those are really good top three. And again, just for my listeners, that's Chuck Fuller's top three for today.
Today.
Oh man, this has been awesome. We at ACSI we have this wonderful opportunity to serve Christian educators across the world. That's our mission is to equip Christian educators as in Christian schools as they seek in their own context to produce these faithful followers of Jesus Christ. Education is not for the faint of heart. I often say that even though it's not, and we live in very difficult times. Out of all the professions that Jesus Christ chose, he chose to be a rabbi. He's the teacher, right? And so I
Right.
believe that we walk in the footsteps of Jesus when we decide to take this up in the formal way. But what words of encouragement do you have for educators? Again, these are educators not just here in the U.S., but really around the world as they seek to be faithful in this paradigm.
Yeah, I think I would say one thing. There is a lot of grace in a really good question. I think leaning into our questions. I often think of an experience I had in 2016. My wife and I took our family to visit some friends who were in China, uh, doing the most important work you can do anywhere. They were doing in that country. And while we were there, I met another old friend that we had done youth ministry together a long, long time earlier. And he would sit in university cafeterias every day, and people would just come and talk to him. And so he said, "Come hang out with me." And so we did. Went to the cafeteria, grabbed a bowl of noodles, sat down, and he said, "Watch what's about to happen." And in about 8 minutes, a young man came over to us, spoke pretty good English, and he simply looked at us and asked, "What is good?" And
Mm,
my first instinct was to say, "Oh, the noodles are great." But then I realized he was asking another question, right? And he wasn't expecting any kind of answer from us. He just recognized us as being culturally, ethnically different than he was. And he just wondered how we might answer the question because this question wasn't really part of his curriculum.
mm,
And he was asking a really high question: what is good?
yeah.
And for me, that moment just locked in this idea that humans have we've always had questions, and leaning into those questions and not being afraid of them can be a really powerful educational tool. I learned this in a contemporary way, I think, from observing Tim Keller's ministry
Mhm.
and what he did with his video series on the reason for God. They would sit in these chairs with skeptics, and mostly for 35, 40 minutes, he would just listen to their questions and their doubts. And at the end of these sessions, he wouldn't try to tie everything together into this perfect knot. He would just try to nudge them along and just say, well, have you thought about this? And
Yeah.
have you considered this? And by nudging them along, he was allowing them to think broader about their questions. And I'm just convinced if you think broadly about your question, eventually you have to look up. Because at
Yeah.
the end of it all, there's only one answer. There's only one thing that makes sense of everything.
Yeah.
So that would be my encouragement to people in education today.
Well, ask good questions, and I would just add to that, as educators, if you have questions, um, try and find folks who can have a good dialogue with you. And if you can't find anyone, I'm sure Dr. Chuck Fuller will definitely be willing to sit down, talk with you, and nudge you along in the right direction. Chuck, this has been wonderful. We've got to chop this up again.
All right, let's do it.
All right, take care.
Grafted Together is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Learn more about biblical worldview and spiritual formation at acsi.org/graftedtogether.